So today's topic, Cyber Security Command, protecting your branch from digital threats.
It is very necessary for us to understand what exactly is that we are trying to. Obviously, the attack has to be, or the access would have to be unauthorized, because if it is authorized, it will be you or anybody relevant who has been authorized and allowed by the organization to have access to that kind of application, or and the access has to be appropriate. And most of you would have heard that the money also is kind of exchange in the shape of bitcoins or the digital currency. Now, if you look at the technologies, so we are looking at the kind of, or we do the risk assessment to understand which are the most vulnerable assets, which requires major consideration with regard to security. So the technology team primarily creates a wall across the these assets, and then eventually allow you an authorization to access only as much as is necessary as per your role profile. Right? Since the data is encrypted or the files are encrypted, the access to them also becomes difficult for you. And since the access does not allow you the visibility, the availability, the CIA triads gets hit. The very first thing that they do is download themselves onto your system and get down to a location where they're not traceable. Right? So, and their very perspective is to see that they are in a position to steal uh, the, the login details or the information which is critical to you. Right? Normally, it should not be enabled. It should be enabled and it should not be disabled. But whereas it has happened the other way around, so this particular thing was disabled, so it was primarily enabled, which said block public access. So when the block public access is enabled, right? Similarly, the other regulators are also very, very serious with regard to these compliances. And in the event of not complying with those mandates, it becomes eminent on the entity that there are bound to be penalties. So, for example, Reserve Bank of India, it imposes heavy fines for non-compliance. We also understand that the threats, they evolve faster than the defenses that we create, because the defense is generally either perceived and created or created after there has been an impact. So, since we see that the attacks are kind of personalized because of these facts, that our information, which is available in the social ecosystem today, is easily available to all the adversaries. And it doesn't really take much time now to create a dossier on a chosen subject. And it has also been asked by Reserve Bank of India regulator that the uh, that the controls which are expected to be used or applied by the supply chain partners have to be equivalent to that of the entity to which they are serving. So for example, if the supply chain partners are today partnering with State Bank of India, so it is expected that their level of security has to be akin to or equivalent to, not less than that which has been deployed by State Bank of India. Because more and more organizations, banks are today, adopting the cloud banking adoption. So one has to also understand that the risks are also kind of, they will have to be handled and attempted to appropriately. So for the bankers also, it becomes eminent and necessary for them to understand what all challenges that they're going to face, and they're expected to plug. And they're also expected to have a stringent control over the service providers. The second aspect it also talks about it is that we have to verify the access, and the dictum with which this particular thing, which simply says zero trust architecture, it says that never trust. They use the tools or the alternate application protocol integrators, and then they access the data or they execute multiple step actions. And since they are kind of the machines have actually learned it to such an extent where they are able to perform those functions. So we normally say that they are not expected to ask for any authorization and they can independently execute that kind of script. But however, in this case, now what it is trying to look at is this, that, for example, if there are procurement processes, or if there are reconciliation processes, or if there are customer service automations, which have been built within the organization, which is sharpened on both the sides. So we need to be, stepping onto it very carefully. Now there is a dark pool, a reading pool. Now this dark pool is nothing but a rapid fire generally, which is thrown onto the CISOs of various different organizations, done by an agency, and it is designed to gauge the opinions, the strategies, the experiences of IT and security professionals onto the issues. That this shift in cybercrime from human-led campaign to a fully autonomous. One more element, self-orchestrating attacks. No, it has not really been seen at, if you remember, some time back there has been a mention of an agency or of a third party or a service, a fintech called Anthropic, using agentic framework, can continue for their persistent threats. So they continue to keep on looking at the credential testings and finally exploiting. So they continue to identify, they iterate and identify the threat, and then eventually they look into all these elements. After weeks of subtle response or understanding, they provide a small variation, which is nothing but a swap in the account, the credit account number, and then they would make use of the entire element. One more element, which happens, and what are the type of new attacks, that we would have, or which are expected, which are done by the agentic AI. Ask the machine to simply go for a KYC validation, and since they have the details, because they are the trusted agent, so they would throw those details and then eventually parse the information to the illegitimate people for a subsequent use of that information. There is already an automated chain hopping in a kind of a situation. Now, understand that we are creating a direction with regard to a particular transaction in, say, for example, in a digital chain. So this has also become a bigger threat. So whereas there are different formats with regard to contactless, wired, or targeted manipulations. However, apt is to say that you don't get an opportunity to touch the screen. Even if you touch the screen has been made in such a form that your touch does not really matter. And once having kind of authenticated, they were sent across the devices by the organization, and those devices were also installed and handled in US by the adversaries, the accomplice, and then eventually they were able to bring about a lot of, right. The autonomy has to be controlled somewhere, because the autonomous systems are today taking calls and taking actions. So we have to see, the Reserve Bank of India said that we need to have a human in the chain somewhere, and that human has to authenticate these actions. Normally it is said that in case if you have to grip, or if you have to have the grip on the system, you'll have to see that only legitimate traffic moves in. So while you're air gapping a particular system, you create. So here it talks about the boardroom accountability. Here it talks about the uh, uh, implementation of EWS, or early warning signals. Here it is talking with regard to the compliance with natural justice, from an event based kind of assessment to a behavioral based assessment. So whenever there is a abnormality into the network, into the machines, into the behavior of the machines, applications, people, we'll have to look into all those elements to see that we are future proofing our organizations.